Do you feel afraid because your heart races, or does your heart race because you feel afraid? William James asked this question in 1884 and turned common sense upside down. His answer launched a century of debate about the nature of emotion. Emotions are psychological states involving subjective experience, physiological response, and behavioral expression. They evolved because they served adaptive functions. Fear motivates escape, love motivates bonding, disgust motivates avoidance of pathogens. But the question of how they arise is surprisingly contested. The James-Lange theory proposes that emotion follows from physiological arousal, not the other way around. You don't tremble because you are afraid. You feel afraid because you perceive yourself trembling. The body responds to a stimulus first. The brain interprets that response as an emotion. Walter Cannon challenged James-Lange by pointing out that physiological responses are too slow and too similar across emotions to explain emotional differentiation. The Cannon-Bard theory proposes that the thalamus simultaneously sends signals to both the cortex, producing subjective feeling, and the body, producing arousal. Stanley Schachter and Jerome Singer proposed that emotion requires two components: general physiological arousal and a cognitive label explaining that arousal. The same arousal state can produce different emotions depending on how you explain it. Their misattribution of arousal studies showed that arousal from one source can intensify unrelated emotions. Richard Lazarus emphasized cognitive appraisal, the evaluation of whether a situation is threatening, beneficial, or irrelevant to your goals. The same event, a job interview, produces anxiety in someone who appraises it as threatening and excitement in someone who sees it as an opportunity. Appraisal precedes emotion. The amygdala is central to fear processing. It receives sensory input directly from the thalamus, bypassing the cortex, and can trigger a fear response before conscious awareness. Ledoux called this the low road. The amygdala fires before you consciously know you are scared, preparing the body for immediate action. The prefrontal cortex modulates and regulates amygdala activity. It provides the top-down control that allows us to suppress fear, delay emotional responses, and act rationally under stress. Damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex produces catastrophic emotional dysregulation, as illustrated by the famous case of Phineas Gage. The facial feedback hypothesis proposes that facial expressions don't just express emotion, they also influence it. Forcing a smile can make cartoons seem funnier. Holding a pen between your teeth activates smile muscles and elevates mood. Botox injections that paralyze frown muscles reduce subjective experience of negative emotion. Paul Ekman studied facial expressions across isolated cultures with no exposure to Western media and found that 6 emotions, happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, and surprise, were recognized universally. This evidence supports Darwin's claim that emotional expressions evolved as species-typical adaptations. While basic expressions may be universal, display rules, cultural norms about when and how emotions should be shown, vary dramatically. Japanese culture encourages emotional suppression in public. American culture encourages more open expression. The same internal emotion produces different outward behavior depending on cultural display rules. Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory proposes that positive emotions broaden our awareness and encourage exploratory thought and action. Over time, this broadened thinking builds lasting personal resources, social bonds, knowledge, resilience. Positive emotions function differently from negative ones, which narrow focus to immediate threats.